that we've lost this year, the amazing Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Oh, it works. Great. And just take a moment, and whether people agree with her or don't agree with her or whatever, there's no doubt that this is a person who had such a profound impact on America and loved her work, loved making the Constitution available to all people. So I thought it would be really appropriate for us to just take a few moments in silence, and not just for her, but think about everybody that we've lost this year, and just take a moment and be inspired. I actually have a, I guess I don't know if it'll work. So let's just take a breath and be in silence. We breathe back into our awareness. Say thank you to Justice Ginsburg, to all of those that we've lost this year and who we loved. So let's take a breath, and this is what they call in speaking taking a hard right turn, going from something very serious to something not so serious, to lift us back up. In the spectrum of spirituality, it's all the same thing, of course. But I want to bring us with us, and I'm going to move now into a joke, all right? I'm just trying to decide which one to read. Okay, I think I'm going to go with this one. Ready? All right. So this is a joke about Andy and his wife. They've been married a long time. I've been married a long time, so I can relate a little bit to this one. Andy and his wife. And Andy's wife really was kind of vain, and she decided that she didn't want to give in to looking older. So she went out and she bought a whole new line of expensive cosmetics, makeup that the salesperson guaranteed would make her look years younger. And she spent a few hours sitting at her makeup table, putting it on and doing her hair and doing every single thing. And after a while, after applying all these miracle products, she goes to her husband, Andy, and she says, "Darling, honestly, if you didn't know me, what age would you say I am?" "Well," he said, looking over her carefully, he said, "well, judging by your skin, I would say you were 20. And judging by your hair, I would say 18. Judging by your eyes, I would say 16. And judging by your figure, I would say 25. Well, she just giggled and smiled. And she said, "You are such a flatterer. Come here, give me a little kiss." And he said, "Wait a second. Hold on, sweetie. I'm still adding up those numbers."
Ooh.
All right. All right. So here's what we're going to do today. Today I'm going to just tell some stories, and then I'm going to tell you 3 quick stories, and then after that I'm going to give you just a little bit of wisdom from my, how does it disappear? There we go. From my new book, which comes out this week, which the story of that book I will tell you another time, and it's a pretty interesting story. But I want to just tell you some stories. And, you know, this is a time when there's so much going on in the world, certainly all the news. Every day it feels like this and that. And we were having dinner with some friends, and one of them said, it's never been like this in the history of this country. It's never been so hard. And I said, yeah, well, just that morning, I had been reading an old New Thought magazine from 1909 called Nautilus magazine. And in that magazine, it had said, it's never been this way ever in the history of this country. And then this morning in my spiritual practice, I was reading a wonderful mystical book that was written in the 1940s during World War II. And I'm reading along, and the person said, and we're living in unprecedented times. It has never been like this in the history of our country. And what I realized from that is there's always been something, you know, there's always been that thing or those things. And that doesn't mean that they're not important. What it means is that we can acknowledge that there is something that has always been there to scare us and frighten us and take us off of our center. But our purpose, and the reason we love coming here, I think, is, and the reason we do spiritual practice is so that we stay in center, and so that we fill our well with spirit first and then go read the headlines. Because otherwise we're just going to be, you know, scared to death all the time until we realize the eternality of ourselves. And by doing that, now we are filled with power, and we can go out in the world and actually be effective. We can be the change rather than just be scared all the time. So I came up with some stories that I thought would be inspiring, because even in the midst of everything, to be the change means that we need to fulfill our life. We need to do the thing that is ours to do. We need to follow our purpose and our passion. And these are some stories. And, you know, we can be inspired by anything and everywhere. And I was reading my latest copy of Billboard magazine. Billboard magazine is the trade magazine for the music industry. It's the magazine where they say, you know, a song is #1 on the charts. The charts are in Billboard. Billboard is the company and all of that puts that all together. So it's an important magazine in the music industry. And so I was reading it, and I got very, very inspired. And the first story that inspired me in there, that I thought would be inspiring for everybody here, is a story by that great spiritual teacher. And I've certainly talked about this spiritual teacher in the past. And it's an important spiritual teacher, I think, for our time, beloved the whole world over. And of course, I'm talking about the great Dolly Parton. And Dolly Parton, not the Dalai Lama, Dolly Parton is somebody who I think has really just spent a lot of her career uplifting and inspiring people. And in this magazine, this issue, this is harder than I thought. This issue is dedicated, you can't see it very well, to country music, this particular issue, and giving awards to different people for country. And Dolly is listed as the #1 power player in Nashville. And this issue, by the way, this interview got a lot of attention because it was in this issue that she came out in support of Black Lives Matter. And it made the news all over the place. And she not only came out in support of it, but she had a great, as she always does, she has a great line that goes with it. She says, of course I support Black Lives Matter. Do we think our little white asses are the only ones that matter? So that's a great line. But I love it that, you know, she's so inspirational. Anyway, pretend I'm Sophia from the Golden Girls. Picture it. Nashville, 1974, Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton in 1974 had a song that hit #1 for her in that year. And you have to keep in mind, I mean, she'd had a number of hits, but you have to keep in mind that in 1974, Dolly Parton was not the kind of global icon that she is today. In 1974, she was mostly known for two things. One was her physical assets, and the other was for being the singing partner of Porter Wagner, who, believe it or not, was actually a much bigger star than she was at the time. She was just, that's who she was. So her having this #1 song was an important thing for her. And as the song hit #1, Dolly got word that Elvis Presley wanted to cut this song. Now, for those of you old enough to remember 1974, Elvis Presley in 1974, there was nobody bigger. That was the biggest thing, you know, and to have a song cut by Elvis Presley and released as a single would have been huge for her. It would have crossed her over out of country into pop. It would have just been so huge for her. But his manager, the famous Colonel Parker, said to her, if you want Elvis to record the song, you have to sign over half of the publishing rights to the song. Now, publishing rights, for those of you who don't know the music business, those are the songwriting credits. The songwriter basically makes the most money on a song. And because it's not just the song that's released, but every time that song is played, sold, used in movies, commercials, or anything, the songwriter is the principal one that makes the money from it. So signing over half of the publishing rights is a really big deal. And so Dolly had to really think about this and think about it and think about it. She had just had #1 with this song on her own, but Elvis was on a completely different level, and she would have made millions from it. But something in her said, no, it's my song, and I can't sign over. If this was a song that maybe I had not cut as a single, I would do it, but this was my song, and it was a #1, and it's kind of my signature. So she says in this interview, she said, I said, I'm really sorry, and I cried all night. I mean, it was like the worst thing, she said. You know, it's like, oh my God, Elvis Presley. And other people were saying, you're nuts, it's Elvis Presley. And I said, I can't do that. Something in my heart says, don't do it. And so I just didn't do it. Now, she said afterwards, she spent nights, months, years thinking, did I just make a huge mistake? But she trusted her gut, and it's a good thing that she did. Why? Because that was in 1974. 8 years later, in 1982, she included that song. She re-recorded it for a movie that she made called The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. By the way, I bet this is the only church talk in America right now that's mentioning the movie The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. But she re-recorded it for Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, and again, it went to #1 on the country charts. Second time. It's only happened twice in music history. The first was The Twist with Chubby Checker. It went twice. It went to #1 twice. So that was great. But then something else happened. 10 years after that, in 1992, there was a movie being made in Hollywood, and the star of the movie was going to be a starring role for a famous pop singer. And in the movie, they were going to remake that famous song, which Ty or Lynette could sing so beautifully, What Becomes of the Brokenhearted. Remember that? That's such a great song. But as it turns out, that song was being used in another movie that year. So they decided that they wanted to search for a different song to remake for this famous pop singer to sing in this movie. And the co-star of the movie suggested this song by Dolly Parton. The co-star of that movie was Kevin Costner. The movie was The Bodyguard. The singer was Whitney Houston. The song is I Will Always Love You. And the song went on to sell 20 million copies. Dolly was the sole songwriter. So she made all the money from that. The album it was on went on to become one of the biggest selling albums of all time. According to Wikipedia, it has sold 45 million copies worldwide. And Dolly made money every time one of those sold as well. And then the song has been licensed. And every time, by the way, the movie played or sold, Dolly got a portion of that. The song has been licensed and used thousands of times, covered by many, many people. And Dolly even recorded it a third time, this time as a duet with Vince Gill. And it went high on the country charts again. And so in the end, the decision to keep it made Dolly not just happy, and it didn't just make her millions. Millions is 7 figures. It didn't make her 7 figures. It didn't make her 8 figures. It made her 9 figures. 9 figures. Dolly says in the interview, she said, Elvis would have killed it. He would have done a great job. She said, but then again, when Whitney's version came out, I made enough money to buy Elvis's house, Graceland. So I think that's great. That story is so wonderful on many levels, but I think it has, for us, the inspiration to always trust your gut, and to trust your gut even in the face of what seems like the worst decision or the opposite decision of what you should be making and what other people tell you to make. To really always do the thing that sits right for you, and to know that everything happens at the right time when you are aligned with your own core values. That's such a great story from our beloved Dolly Parton, who's sitting here listening to me. The second story, short story from this Billboard magazine issue, is a story about a singer I actually hadn't heard of before, but his name is, what is his name? Michael Hardy. But he just goes by the name Hardy, just this. If you are a country music fan, you might know of him. He's kind of a hot name in music right now. But this story is a little different. He tells the story in this magazine of going and spending a week hanging out on his family's property, which I think it said was in Mississippi. His property had been in his family for over 100 years, and it was his kind of connecting place property. And when he was out on the property and doing the things that he loved to do, he was looking out over this vast property that he was on and how beautiful it was. And he thought, wow, this is God's country. And then he thought, I should write a song called God's Country. He's a singer-songwriter. I should really do a song called God's Country. And he made a note of it. And then he left. And when that visit was over, he went back to Nashville, where he lives, and he went into the studio with his writing partner, and he remembered that he should write a song called God's Country. So he mentioned it, and they sat right there, and they recorded, wrote a song together called God's Country. Now, he was thinking he would record it, but what he didn't know, I guess, is that his co-writer took the song, forwarded it to the music producer of a famous country singer named Blake Shelton. Blake Shelton is huge in country, but he's also one of the judges on the TV show The Voice, and he's married to Gwen Stefani, and he's huge. 6 days later, 6 days after they wrote that song, Blake Shelton recorded it. And a few weeks after that, it went to #1 on the country charts. It went to number 17 on the pop charts, went to #1 on the Canadian country charts. It was certified, it has been certified triple platinum so far. And in just the last 12 months, that song has won Single of the Year at the Academy of Country Music Awards, Single of the Year at the Country Music Association Awards, and it's won a Grammy. So the moral of the thing that inspired me about this small story is that how important it is to take time to rest, to go to those places where you feel the most connected, to listen to life, to look around, to pay attention. And when you get an idea, follow through with it. Just follow through, because you never know what's going to happen. He may have done this 100 times and those songs hadn't done anything, but this time when he followed through, this is what happened. It just went right into that vein of gold, and poof, now it's forever out there and available. The third story that is in this magazine that I think is so inspiring for us and reminds us to be who we are. This is a story about a singer-songwriter, this guy here, whose name is Shane McNally. I hadn't heard of him. Maybe some of you have. He's also a singer-songwriter, a very talented one. But the story of Shane is different than the others, a little bit different. He was in Nashville trying to get a record deal or trying to sell get his songs recorded by other artists, and nothing was happening for him. He couldn't even get arrested in Nashville, nothing. Years in Nashville, nothing. For one reason, there's a lot of competition in Nashville. Anybody in the music industry will tell you Nashville has a very high concentration of singers and songwriters and such, so there's a lot of competition. And the other, he says now, the other reason is that he is gay. And Nashville's in the South, and this is in the 1990s, and he was closeted. Nobody knew he was gay. And so he was that person where he was closeted, trying to make it in Nashville, very conservative town, and trying to do the best he could. But nothing was happening, absolutely nothing. Songwriting in the music business was his love, but he thought to himself, maybe I should give up on my dreams. And then he said this, I'm reading from the article. He said, for a long time, the Texas native didn't think he fit in Nashville either. He had a brief stint as an artist, and he released an album, but lost his label and publishing deal shortly thereafter. He then moved to Los Angeles, where he spent about 7 years wrestling with his identity and bitterly wondering if he would ever make it in the industry. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with people over the years in that exact same position. They feel like they should have made it, they should have done this, life should have opened up, and it didn't, and they hold that bitterness. They become questioning, why didn't it happen? Well, so all those years in Nashville, nothing. 7 years in Los Angeles, nothing. And then 2 things happened. The first thing that happened is that he decided to come out of the closet and be his full, authentic self. That changed everything for him. He met the love of his life. They ended up getting married, and now they have 2 kids. So his life changed in that way. The other thing is he says this. He said he gave up on waiting for his big break. He said, quote, I finally had this epiphany of I'm doing music because it's the only thing that consumes me. I'm not doing it to make money, he says. And when that happened, that shift, that epiphany, that's when I started making money. Well, the first thing that happened for him was that a big country star, Leanne Womack, she's famous for that song, I Hope You Dance, she cut one of his songs. And then another person cut one of his songs, and then another person cut one of his songs. And now he's a successful songwriter and producer. They moved, I guess, back to Nashville. And when I say successful, I mean that as of right now, he's so far had 32 songs that he wrote or co-wrote hit #1 on the country charts so far from country's biggest names. He also started a music publishing company. Remember, music publishing is for the songwriters. That's where the bulk of the money is, which is one of the most successful music publishing companies in Nashville right now. Oh, and he started his own record label, successful record label, where he's the co-president. It's called Monument Records. And now he's even featured on television on a show on NBC, which is called Songland. And the reason that he's in this magazine is Billboard magazine is giving him what they call the Trailblazer Award, blazing a trail. Nothing happened until he blazed his own trail. He became himself. I think the lessons from that story are to be who you truly are. That's why you were made who you were, because the world needs exactly who you are. I think another great lesson or inspiration from that story is that authenticity was the key for him, and that he finally gave up trying to make it work and instead just did what he loved to do. And yet another inspiration from that story is don't give up on your dreams. You being you can make such a huge difference. Those three stories, when I read them, I read them like 6 times, and that's when I thought I should probably talk about these, because if they're inspiring me, they will inspire other people as well. So let me tie this all together, because those are great stories, but we also have to bring it into our own lives and look at ourselves and think, how does this apply to me? And in my book, The Prosperity Principles, which is just coming out, I'm so excited about this, by the way. I wrote this. I said, it's in a section called Your Turning Point. I'm going to stop that. Where I said, every person I admire has lived a life of ups and downs. It seems like the lives of most people who achieve greatness follow a pattern. They begin in a place that is painful or difficult or challenging or filled with lack and limitation of some sort. And then there's a turning point. This turning point becomes the moment they draw the line in the sand, step over the line, and never look back. From that moment on, everything changes. They are no longer the victim of their circumstances. They are the author of their future. Thinking about those stories and the stories of people that inspire me, many of whom are in this congregation, community, I think of how important it is to have that turning point. Each of the artists, Dolly Parton had a turning point. The other two had turning points as well. I wrote here in the book, one of the uncomfortable truths about life is this: we don't always get what we want, we get what we settle for. After all, if you didn't settle for something, you would get more, right? That's common sense. And yet it's not always something we want to hear. It's uncomfortable because it puts the responsibility of your life squarely on the shoulders of you and me. And I tell the story in here of some of the difficulties of my life, and then I say something inside me realized that if I wasn't the one settling for these outcomes, then why did it feel like I was taking a backseat in my own life? That Shane McNally must have felt that way many times during those years when it felt like he couldn't get traction in his life, that nothing was going on. Why did it feel like I was always waiting and waiting for things to change, and yet nothing ever did? It's so much easier to blame our circumstances on other people and on other factors, on all the hurdles we have to jump over. Some of those things we label as limitations are very real. I'm not making light of them. Some of the conditions in our life are difficult and are not always of our own making. However, our experience of the conditions in our life is under our control. For every reason you can pinpoint as the main reason that you aren't where you want to be or why you haven't achieved what you want, you can find someone who has had that same reason and yet has had amazing success. Thinking of these people, thinking of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, thinking of some of the great icons that we've lost this year, thinking of people who inspire me to this day. These people didn't settle for mediocrity, and neither should we. The more we tell ourselves and anyone we can get to listen all the reasons we are where we think we should be in any area of our life, the more those reasons are the ones that hold us back. The people who aren't held back are the people who won't be held back by anything. Which kind of person do you want to be? So right now, I think that we can be inspired by these stories, by other people, by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, by others, to be that most authentic person we can be. When Shane McNally did, everything changed. His authenticity is the very thing, the very key that it took to turn things around. When Dolly Parton trusted her gut, saying no to the biggest star in the world and millions of dollars, she didn't know that down the road she was going to make history. That song was #1, by the way, for 14 weeks when Whitney Houston recorded it. She didn't know that it was going to make history. And when that country artist Hardy was just looking out on property and said, hey, this is God's country, I should write a song about it, he had no idea it was going to become such a huge song. That's country music, but it's applicable to every success and every walk of life. We can be inspired. We have to remind ourselves, especially during this time, to be inspired every day, because this is a time when the world needs us, the authentic us, more than ever before in our lifetime. So with that, let's just take a moment and close our eyes and take a breath and just go to that place, one breath deeper, that is that place of our passion. It's our place of our authenticity. It's where we are the most of who we are. We don't have to do anything to be that person. We are that person. This is the person that you were made to be in this world. Right now, as we breathe, I call forth that authentic self even more than ever before for each one of us. Your authentic self is now your truer identity. You breathe it more than ever before. Every breath reveals yourself and to the world that is so needing you. The world needs you. And that bright light that is in you, that is so bright for so many of us in this community, is even brighter now than it has ever been before. Every breath we take, that light grows stronger. And we reveal our divine inheritance right here and right now in our lives. We let this be the truth of who we are. We let this be our truth right here, right now, in this world. Together we say, and so it is.